Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is Carmina and today we are going to have a very fun and interactive video. You can see there's 7 of us here. All of us have something in common. Well, 2 things in common at least. We are all astrologers and we are all millennials. So the topic of the day would be to showcase our experiences as astrologers of our generation, also compare it a bit to the experiences of the former generation, talk about the challenges and the advantages that we may have. And maybe if you are very perceptive, you will notice that there's only one representative of the feminine gender, of the yin part of the situation. And it's not because we didn't want to. We reached out to several women astrologers, but some of them have a day job, some of them are traveling, and actually Heather from Beyond Astrology said she could make it, but then she fell ill. So I hope you get well soon, Heather. So I guess it's just us, but it doesn't mean there are not, women millennial astrologers, and I'm gonna invite them probably in the future. So, hi guys.
Hello.
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 Yeah, I'm gonna ask everyone to introduce themselves and say how their interest in astrology got sparked, if it was like through a millennial method, like through something like digital TV or something more classic, and since when they started practicing astrology. I'm gonna ask you please to keep it under 2 minutes because there's a lot of us, and then we'll go to the questions, okay? So, who wants to be first?
Fernando.
Okay.
Why not? Okay. So just to make, hi guys, hi Carmina, hi Corey, hi Lars, hi Nishi, hi Babajit, hi Ashwin. Nice to see you guys. It's very nice to be here and be part of this. Just to make it short, I in 2011 I got my chart read for the first time. And when my chart was read, I said, I don't believe in this. And 2 years later, everything happened. And since 2013, 2014, I've been studying to further advance my knowledge of astrology. And, one thing led to another. And, I got my my books, I got teachers, and I just started practicing. And now I have my YouTube channel and my website. And it was just very organic in a way. Just the astrology bug just bit me, and it takes time in order to develop that infection. But I mean, I've been doing it ever since 2014 as a professional astrologer. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you guys, I didn't mention, you can see that there's a lot of us here and not all of us practice the same type of astrology. But the point today is not to see what differentiates us, but what makes us, have things in common so that we are astrologers. So I'm just gonna ask you, for the sake of diversity, to also tell us where you're from and where you live, if you live in the same country that you were born, and what type of astrology or types, because people practice several types. So you can tell us that, Fernando.
Okay, so continuing on, I am from Puerto Rico. I've lived here ever since I was born, but I have also lived in Europe and I lived in the States. And what else did you
and what type of astrology do you practice? Babylonian, Mayan?
I started studying both sidereal, traditional Vedic astrology. At the same time, I started studying, the more tropical version of Vedic astrology. And now I am more concentrated on tropical Vedic astrology. But I also study Hellenistic, and, I also like magical stuff. So I try to combine all those things together.
Wonderful. Okay, so who's next? Let's take Nishi.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nishi. I started studying astrology, probably around the same time I started studying Ayurveda, which was maybe 7-8 years ago. So I started studying medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and I'm also still studying Tibetan medicine. And that's when my interest in astrology really peaked. I didn't start out studying astrology intentionally. I just wanted to study medicine. And it was just introduced as part of the curriculum, kind of in a really simple way, like there's astrology and you can see some of these things in the chart, and that was it. But I was really curious about it, and so I just started researching it on my own. And when I started seeing patients, I felt like there was really a missing element, and that led me to really want to look into astrology and see what could I see astrologically that I couldn't see medically, you know, just from the pulse, just from the tongue, just from seeing the person. And I found that so much information was coming astrologically that explained way more of what was going on with people. And so that's how I became an astrologer, basically. And I guess I didn't start really practicing professionally until a couple of years ago. And now I just do medicine and astrology as one thing. So I don't do two things anymore. It's all through astrology, and I've taken that as the primary avenue. I live in the United States, where I was born. My family's from India. My grandfather is an astrologer. My great-grandfather was also an astrologer, which I discovered after I started studying astrology, interestingly enough. So it's kind of something that I feel connected to in all kinds of ways and levels. I practice Vedic astrology, and I use the tropical zodiac. That's my synopsis.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Nishi. Now let's go to Babajit.
Yeah, so I'm Babajit. I have a channel called Exotic Astrology, which I opened 5th March 2017, almost 18 months back. And I have been interested in spiritual topics, especially the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and many other scriptures from the Vedic tradition. Loosely around from the year 2004, I have been studying all of these. And from 2009, it had become very intense. And in the year 2010, I went to South India, Chennai, for my bachelor studies, engineering. And when I went there, I met many gurus and so many other spiritual personalities. And South India is full of holy places. Like there are places like Hampi, there's Tirupati, there's Srirangam, and so many places. So there I started reading the Srimad Bhagavatam in detail. And in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a lot of detail about the astrological context. There's astronomy, there's a lot of stuff there. There's a description of where Rahu is, how Rahu looks like. So I was fascinated by all this. And yeah, so from that time I have been studying quite seriously about astrology, the sidereal astrology, Vedic astrology as we know. And yes, 1.5 years back, I opened my channel. And yes, in my family, there are no astrologers. Nobody is in any way related to astrology or any other spiritual topics. So yeah, it's all by myself in the family. Maybe I'm the first one to start. So yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Thank you very much, Babajit. So I see that you actually started also hands-on with a guru, right? Not just through digital, although you are a millennial. So millennials can also start with gurus. Okay. Let's go to Lars.
All right, thanks. I'm Lars, and I grew up in New York City, and I currently live in New Mexico, which is in the United States, for those of you who don't know. And I started studying astrology about 7 years ago, I guess. Yeah, I think same year as you, Fernando. And I actually did start with a teacher. I was going to music school, and after I gave my junior recital in classical guitar, I started to feel like there was something more than what I was doing with my life. And it was like a very strange feeling. And it kind of started several months before that. This was like January, February of 2011. And so the harp professor, believe it or not, at the school was an astrologer and was teaching an informal course on astrology. It was modern, like Western astrology. And so I went because I was really curious, because some friends had talked about it, and I was like, I used to think it was complete.
Oh,
she saw that. Oh, did you lose me? Okay. Well,
yes, when
anyway,
you said the bad word, we just censored you.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. All right. So anyway, I went to her class, and she took a look at my chart and, told me that I was going through this like major change, like, and described what I was going through. And I was like, what? Wow, this is amazing. That's exactly how I feel. And, she explained it's because Uranus is transiting over your sun, and this is blah, 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 blah. So then I basically became hooked and studied with her informally. We would just have a lot of conversations about it. And then I just ended up studying over the years, like a ton of different styles of astrology. I started with Dane Rudyard and humanistic astrology, and read some psychological astrology. And then I got into horary astrology through a book on medical horary astrology. So I studied a lot of horary astrology, and then I got into medieval European and Persian astrology. Then I studied Hellenistic. Then I've studied a few systems from the Indian system or continent. And then the last thing I really studied in astrology was Uranian astrology, which is really awesome, actually. Trans-Neptunians and all. So I guess that's my story.
Thank you very much, Lars. Now let's go to Ashwin.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm from Chennai, basically brought up from Chennai, where Babaji did his college. And I've seen everyone here, but I've not seen Nishi Pandit, so special hi. I've seen Carmina's work with the interview that she did with Fernando Raul, and I've known about Corey and what he does. So I pretty much know of some people here. So, and I come from a family of astrologers, and my entire maternal family, everyone is an astrologer, and I started with astrology in somewhere by mid 2011 during the sub period of my 8th Lord, and I practice sidereal Vedic astrology, and I've been kind of playing with both tropical and sidereal for the past 1 year. I also learned Hellenistic astrology, and I'm reading some of the texts of Hellenistic tradition. So I'd like to call myself as an astrologer. So it's just, I don't want to attach any tradition with me. So that's what I believe in. So that's my perspective.
Thank you very much. Now, Corey.
Yeah, I started out being very into meditation. So in a way, I guess it was sort of similar to Babaji, where I was getting into a meditation tradition. A lot of people over here, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina in the USA. A lot of people over here, Paramhansa Yogananda came to America. So a lot of us learned yoga, meditation from him. And even though he wasn't, very much advocating astrology, he was just trying to get people to meditate more. His guru was Sri Yukteswar, who was a very, he talked about how much of an astrologer he was and how much he helped his life. And there's a few chapters in that book that made me it just blew my mind, and there were a few chapters in that section of that book about astrology, and it really got me interested. But at the same time, I was kind of a millennial in a way that I was reading New Age books and random things, and reading about ancient history and ancient cultures, and they always valued astrology so much. And I never really could connect to American culture. So when I found that, it just felt like something really familiar and like this refresher course almost for a lot of things that I already thought or felt very comfortable with. And yeah, I've just been doing it ever since. That was in around 2007 and 8 when I started to kind of switch from just reading New Agey stuff to getting more serious about meditation and yoga, and it's been a great process.
Thank you very much, Corey. And I just wanted to ask you, because Corey already mentioned about the millennial and the digital age. So do you think a lot of people that hear about astrology, they have this idea that it's a new agey thing, and some parts of it are more modern, like Uranian astrology, although some people debate that in the ancient texts the outer planets were already mentioned, but that's very controversial. So how do you guys reconcile that, the more modern part with the more traditional part? Like, how do you think that works together? who wants to have the word? Nishi, you're so quiet. You're so serious.
I can answer it.
Yeah.
So you're asking, how do we reconcile modern astrology with traditional astrology and the so-called New Age movement?
Yes.
Well, I think it's important to point to what Corey was saying, which is that astrology is an ancient tradition that's actually been with humanity since the dawn of civilization and even pre-civilization. It's actually a prehistoric tradition. It's the most ancient and so-called primitive worldview. And if you study religious texts, you study spiritual texts, you realize that a lot of the cosmological descriptions, a lot of the religious language is in fact astrological in nature. So human beings before, recorded history were basically founded in an observation of life that was psychophysical, or observing the relationship between the heavens and the earth and so forth, even before it's articulated. That's something people can observe, without language. So astrology is an ancient tradition, and obviously over the years, over the thousands of years, it has evolved, just as human civilization has evolved, just as religious traditions have evolved. And in different parts of the world, different cosmologies have popped up. There's a common thread in all of them. Astrology is really the great universal in that sense. And if you can understand it, you can understand pretty much everything. So, all these things have changed and evolved and become specified in all kinds of ways. And that's what we have as modern astrology now. But modern astrology is just an evolute of something that's very traditional and very ancient. And I think those roots are still active, and the principal philosophy is that the macrocosm is in the microcosm. That's in all traditions of astrology, Western, Eastern, however you look at it, shamanistic. And it's practiced different ways, different techniques, different philosophies, depending on, if you're in India or you're in Tibet or you're in China or you're in Greece or you're in Egypt. They have different ways of talking about it. But I think ancient astrology is still alive. And that's an amazing thing, given the current worldview and so forth. That's an amazing thing. And it just shows that this is something that's intrinsic to humanity.
Yes, it's about these archetypes that keep getting recycled by all the the new generations. And I think Corey is doing a work on that. I don't want to do a spoiler, but
I don't know what you're talking about, Carmina.
okay. Okay. So, Babaji, do you want to add anything to what Nishi said about the New Age perspective on astrology, or the perception? Like, some people think that it's such a New Age and crazy thing that we're doing.
Well, I would say that is because of the ignorance of the fact that this is already there in our Vedic scriptures. And secondly, I would say is that if they want to reconcile, well, that has happened through the years, and that will always keep happening, and that is also happening now. So what I would say is, if somebody wants to do that reconciliation, it's very important that we understand the basics, because if we know the basics, then we can understand that if there is something new which has come, where do we fit that? Suppose there is a new topic which comes out, so then we will exactly know in which house is it related to. If we do not know the basics properly, then we will try to do some fixology. Oh, maybe this is related to this or that. But if you know the concept, like for example, fifth house is the house of children, or anything that makes you happy, like playing a piano or singing the guitar or cooking or anything. So then if we know the basics properly, we can incorporate all the new things, and it is actually already there in the text, as we know. And there will be great personalities who will be from one tradition, and then they will see the new stuff coming, and they will maybe note it down that now if you see third house, it can also represent like aeroplanes or something like that, for example, which may not be there exactly. Parashara may not write that this is Vahan. But if we know what third house is, then if tomorrow something like something very fantasy which comes out, which may be related to the third house, then we can put it there. So
like apps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like apps nowadays. You make such a good point that is, to me, that is the funnest part of being a millennial, or this part of this new astrology, is seeing how to find these new things and
finding significators.
Back to the ancient shastras, and find how they connect.
Yeah, and regarding this, I also did one thing. This is the last thing I'll say. In my channel, I had started one playlist that like for example, computer science is a subject, and how do you relate it with astrology? So for example, I have given things like the fourth house, as we know, it's the house of home, right? So if you translate it to computer science, what it will be? Because I'm a computer engineer, so I can try sometimes. So I think that's the house of storage, database, distributed systems, those things. And 11th house will represent big data, technologies like machine learning, because that's kind of the hot topic now. And 10th house will represent things like authority, or there are many subjects in electrical engineering. So one of my friend was an electrical engineer. I told him that, see, these houses represent these things. Can you tell me, is there any subject related to that? So then I just made a video. So I have also started working in that domain to some extent.
Yes, a great point. Like Babajit and Corey were saying, if you really know your basics and not really learn by heart some explanations, if you really know the core and the basics as were given by the, and ancient text, then you will know how to apply, like this is the covering of something, then the planet rules it, or this house, or so it's really interesting. You can play with it. Lars, you also mentioned you studied Uranian astrology, so how does that fit in? That's something quite modern.
Quite modern,
so yeah, you can tell us how that fits in with your other studies.
Yeah, so the thing I liked so much about Uranian astrology, I first started to kind of, that it was so incredibly logical and rational. Okay, it wasn't random and jumbled like a lot of modern astrology of like, oh, Neptune rules Pisces and Pluto rules Scorpio. But it wasn't random like that. And Alfred Witte, who was the German man who invented Uranian astrology, he actually, I found out, had studied these ancient Hellenistic texts. I guess he knew like Greek and Latin and stuff. So he actually was familiar with ancient astrology, and he was building off of Johannes Kepler's work on astrology. And we still don't really have anyone practicing the Kepler system, unfortunately, that I know of, but maybe one day we will. But this is significant because Kepler got rid of the zodiac and relied purely on mathematical relationships between the planets. So he actually added several new aspects, so to speak. So Witte was just sort of pulling a lot from Kepler, and Witte played around with the zodiac and with all that stuff, but eventually he got rid of the zodiac, he got rid of the houses, and he started relying upon purely mathematical relationships between the planets and midpoints and the lots, or what are called the Arabic parts later on. So which is all purely mathematical stuff, midpoints and lots, it's just pure mathematics. And he kept the ascendant and the midheaven, and he kept the nodes, and he sort of redefined how all those things work within a structure. And then he only focused on the mathematical relationships based upon basically 4 and 8, with the exception of the conjunction opposition. So he was also using squares and what are called semi-squares and sexquiquadrates, these hard aspects, because he noticed that when planets were in these hard aspects, they were engaged with one another. And so he was able to predict with strike in World War II, I believe. He was able to use this system to predict with precision artillery strikes. And so as a result, it became very dangerous, and he became an enemy of the state and that sort of a thing. And then the most fascinating part about it that trips a lot of people up is he started noticing that there were these points in the zodiac, in the charts that he was working with, that kept playing into the scheme. And so he thought, what if this is a planet? So he actually discovered, or he plotted out the astronomical cycles for these hypothetical planets, and he did 4. He charted 4, and then I think a friend of his or something charted another 4. So there's basically 8 hypothetical trans-Neptunian planets in Uranian astrology, and I was skeptical at first.
Wait, I lost him.
They work. Needless to say.
Lars, you're cutting off. Can you repeat everything you said?
Not everything.
Everything go back to the beginning. Okay,
no.
so
after the trans-Neptunian planets.
No, of course it cuts off then, right? So the trans-Neptunian planets are 8 hypothetical planets that still haven't been discovered, but have their orbits charted. So they could be an astronomical reality. They might not be planets, right? But they could be other astronomical realities. But they really, really work in terms of prediction and delineation, like unbelievably well. And Uranian is one of the most accurate predictive forms of astrology that I've encountered. And I'm not a master of it by any means, but they are really useful for delineating things in the modern world, you know? Okay. So like you have like the planet Vulcanus, which comes to mind, which very much has anything and everything to do with like oil refineries and energy and power plants. You have Zeus, which has to do with like missiles and rockets and firepower and like city building and stuff like that. You know, you have Cupido, which has a lot to do with like with sort of like it. I don't know. It reminds me of things like TV dinners and stuff like that. Like in more hypothetical planets.
Lars is getting a bit cut off.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can more easily relate these hypothetical planets to the more modern stuff of our world.
Yes. Okay, so you have like with Uranian astrology, they allegedly discovered new celestial bodies that would relate to newer things that exist.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I also wanted to ask, because all of us are on YouTube, probably all of us have YouTube channels, and how do you think this YouTube and social media in general plays out for the millennial astrologers? Do you think it's more an advantage or a disadvantage? Because there's a lot of information, but a lot of it is not of such good quality. You know, how can people, do you think, differentiate the quality of an astrologer? And is it more comfortable now? Because in the old days, people just went to the astrologer, or at most they consulted them via phone. Now we have Skype, we have Zoom. How does that feel for you, this type of interaction, which is more a bit impersonal? I mean, it's easier, but it's also more a bit impersonal. So I'm going to ask Ashwin.
Okay. I just wanted to add one more point to what Lars, Fernando, and others have spoken about. It's like we just bifurcate the eras and we have prefixes for the ages as of now. But when it was 1st century BC or 1st century AD, it was modern era in the 1st century BC or 1st century AD. So for us, it is postmodern era at this particular time, and it was ancient time then. So I think it is important for us to live with the age and accept and try to see what works for us and stuff, instead of giving some prefixes in terms of age. So anyway, we all practice some form of ancient tradition, which is at least 2000 years ago in terms of Vedic astrology and Hellenistic astrology. And as Lars said, I also began with Uranian astrology and cosmobiology before a year, but for some reason it didn't take off. And I know a little bit about midpoints and stuff, and it adds a lot of value to what we do. So I think it's important for us to stick to the age and accept whatever comes by to see what works, and let's not worry about what doesn't work. So that's one thing. And about the recent thing that you asked about social media, and I think it relates to the authenticity of the astrology that is available on the internet today. So as it is, you said, YouTube channels are really a good source. I see social media as a very positive thing that is happening in the age of Kali Yuga, and I see Kali Yuga as actually a positive stage for each and everything in the world, not just astrology. So we tend to black out, or we tend to kind of put Kali Yuga as a negative thing, and we blame Kali Yuga for all the blunders or mistakes that humanity commits. But that is not what Kali Yuga preaches. So I really don't like when people try and put Kali Yuga as a reason for whatever is happening today. Whatever is happening today, it's because of us, because of humanity, and because of the errors that human makes. So that's one thing that I wanted to establish here. And as it is, this is the age of Rahu, and to me, Rahu is a positive planet. I don't take Rahu, even though Rahu is a naturally malefic, I see a lot of positive things that come out of Rahu. It's like Ardra Nakshatra, where Rahu helps us to actually destroy the illusions around us and come out as a real human being that Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam states, as explained earlier by Babajit. So that is one thing. And if you are coming on YouTube, I think it is easier for people to catch whether you know astrology or whether you don't know astrology. So when a person comes on YouTube, I think he knows something about astrology. And so that's what something that the person adds a face value to whatever he says, because he comes on visual medium, and it is far more easier to trust people when they are on YouTube. And there are so many websites. I think Tony Howard of the Astrology University hosts a website, if I'm not wrong, Find the Astrologer or Find an Astrologer. I think I'll ping you later on. I don't really know the link to the website, but there you can find authentic astrologers and the names of astrologers and what kind of tradition they practice and stuff. So there are so many good stuff that is happening in the modern age, and it is far more easier to find the authenticity of an astrologer and to find out what nature of astrology he or she practices. So there are a lot of cultural values and cultural ideas that are attached to a common human being who wants to approach an astrologer. It is fine if you don't want to approach a Vedic astrologer. It is fine if you don't want to approach a Western astrologer, or if you want to approach only Vedic or a Western astrologer. That has a lot of cultural value attached, but I think it is pretty much easy to find out the authenticity of the astrologer. So if there is any fake astrologers that are doing rounds, I think I'll just try and give a little bit of advice or a tip to people who wants to consult astrologers, because I've seen a lot of, I'm not very active on Facebook groups, but I'm quite active in watching what happens in the Facebook groups. So there are people who don't add face value as people add it on a YouTube channel. So people come there and copy paste stuff that are available or that were written by other people or other astrologers and claim to be their own, which is basically a mistake and not the mistake of Kali Yuga again. So there it is easier to find, it is not very easy to find out the face value of an astrologer. Okay. So I think it's better to find an astrologer who has an authentic Facebook page and an authentic website or an authentic YouTube channel. And there are people who write articles and kind of publicize themselves on the channels. Yeah, I see Lars, for example. Lars is here. Lars has an astrology website for himself. And the moment you get into Lars's website, it is very easy to know or understand that he's an authentic astrologer. I'm sure everyone is an authentic astrologer, but I'm quite familiar with Lars's writings, so I'm just taking Lars as an example. So I'm not, I really like what every one of us are doing. So, so that's what makes a difference. It is important.
So in your opinion, I see that you see that there are more benefits than disadvantages for this digital experience that we have now.
Yes, I think it is as much as technology has developed, it is important for people to become a bit more aware of what are the negatives that are going on, so that it is easier to get attached to the positives and just leave off the negatives and call Rahu as benefits.
Thank you, Ashwin. Fernando, do you want to add anything to this topic?
Oh yes, just to make echo of everything that people said, as Nietzsche said, astrology is prehistoric, as Babajit said, you need to learn the basics. And, as Lars made echo of the modern astrology, I mean, we have to realize that there's only one sun, one moon, one Mars, one Mercury. And sometimes, astrologers, some people say, are ruled by Uranus, which is like revolution and fighting. But I think that if we are serious astrologers, we should start thinking about what we have in common and what brings us together than the things that bring us apart. And in many ways, in terms of the tradition, I mean, traditional astrology from Europe or India, I think it's the same tradition, the same Indo-European tradition. And I think this is the beginning of, bringing together both traditions and bridging them together. And I mean, we in many ways as millennial astrologers in the internet are pioneers of this thing, because it's the first time in history that all the traditions of the world in terms of stargazing, of astrology, are coming together for the first time probably in 2,000 years. and we are exchanging ideas, we're exchanging techniques, we're exchanging philosophies, and it's a melting pot. And from this melting pot, we can reach a global astrological tradition, and it's just starting out, I believe, right? In terms of YouTube and the internet, social media as per se, there was an American academic named Neil Postman who dealt with communications, and he said that every time a new technology came around, there happened like a Faustian exchange, right? A new technology comes along, and then we exchange something from our human nature in order to access that technology. For example, when the printing press came, then we were able to make more books. We were able to make more written material, for studying, for learning. But in a way, we lost the ability of memorization. We lost the ability of just retaining that knowledge that still remains in many Asian countries like India, where they retain in memory, some shastras. We've lost that in many ways, but at the same time, we've gained the ability to access a lot of information. And I think that's what's happening with social media and internet. We've lost that Männerbund, or that initiatic tradition of these groups that would choose people specifically and lend them the knowledge. And now we have all the knowledge that there is possible to gain in the internet, and it's there. I mean, but people just don't care about it because that's human nature. But some people do, and that's the real trial that an astrologer has to go through. He has to learn autodidactically, then he has to get a guru or a teacher, and start deciding what applies to him, what doesn't apply to him. And the internet is an intrinsic part of that. And although we've lost that tradition of guru apprentice, or is kind of overshadowing, the internet is overshadowing that tradition, we've gained access to a lot of information. So in the future, we're going to see that the information is going to be available, but that sacrosanct, that holy aspect of it is going to diminish by the fact that it's all around us. It's very accessible. So that's something that we have to deal with and come to face with that reality that this knowledge is going to become mundane. It's going to become easily accessible to all, and the symbols are going to be there. They're going to be mixed with the mundane symbols, and we have to realize which ones are. So we are getting a lot of information, we are spreading a lot of information, but at the same time, we have to be wary of oversaturation of information, and we have to be wary of knowing the basics, coming into contact with our heart, coming into contact with pure intent to really know what works, what doesn't work, what's real, what's not real, and what's traditional and what's modern in the end. So I believe like it's the beginning of something very good in astrology, because we're coming together, we're exchanging ideas. Sometimes we bash each other too, so that's part of it too. But like we're building something that is gonna be, big in the coming decades, or at least something that our grandchildren are gonna be proud of us, I think.
Thank you, Fernando. I really liked when you said, the fact that when we start something new, we have to let go of something old, because I was watching a lecture yesterday and they were saying whenever somebody learns something new, it's very difficult because they have to let something inside of them physically, like really die, like an old idea, they have to let it die. And that's why it's so difficult to learn something new. So yeah, also there's a lot of newness involved, and there are also a lot of false prophets. But I think everyone, like Ashwin said, if you want to find the good quality information, you can use your common sense and you can find the good astrologers. Does anyone else want to add about this social media? Yeah,
I'll say something about that. And also I think that's why we need to have a strong Mars to be able to see through concepts well, and work with concepts well, and not be too attached to certain concepts. I find that when Mars is afflicted, one can have strong aversions to any concepts that aren't what they think are right and their opinion sometimes, and that can become a very challenging thing. And so I think that's also why Mars's enemy is Mercury, you know, all the many ideas, you know, and so Mars can be kind of thrown off from social media and like and this YouTube world where there's just so much new opinions, and it's not like all of us, like I think all of us are great readers, but you might, you know, I might say something and then you might watch Fernando's channel, he says a totally different thing and it confuses someone, you know. This is what happens to me personally. But that might be because of my chart. So I wanted to say that, in my opinion, I don't actually think that it's really like better or worse in any way. I think that everyone's getting exactly what they're meant to get for their karma and why they've incarnated at this moment in time and space, you know, and there can only be at this time. And so I think that it's kind of neat. And I like to, like, at least the charts of all the readers that I know, I observe that, wow, the people that have Rahu in, you know, public places like in the 7th house or with Venus or in a connection of Venus, they tend to just go and do really well on YouTube, you know what I mean? And like putting themselves out there, it does them really well. And then sometimes people that have like K2 connecting in the same way to like the 7th house or K2 in Libra or K2 with Venus, they're like innately so already social and into sharing, but their consciousness is maybe not needing that as much, and they need to kind of evolve more on their own. I find those people get frustrated sometimes when they try to go on YouTube and engage in social media and all these things, but it's really for their own good that they're experiencing that frustration, so that they're forced to go into the Rahu zone that is maybe more solitary or on your own or whatever. And so I think that when it comes to my friends and stuff, it kind of depends on your chart too, like the experience that you're going to have when you become an astrologer in this age.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to add to
Yeah,
this topic?
I wanted to add some things shortly, that there's one small issue with YouTube is, like, many of you would have been facing this, and I also face this. So I would like to take this moment here. So what happens is we see videos, okay, Venus in the 1st house, Rahu in 7th house, Ketu in 7th house, especially 7th house. Everybody is terrorized by Rahu. So they think that in the initial days when people are learning astrology, they think, okay, the 7th house is bad, means everything's finished. I'm out. Either I will stay single, or I'll be divorced, or my partner will cheat on me, either of the three. So they are like, it's life is horror. So I would like to say it's not like that. That is just one placement. There are so many things which we need to see. So when we are behaving like Mercury, which as he said, it's like focusing on the details, it is very important that we also understand there is a planet called Jupiter also, which sees from the top. Yes, it's like all the he sees
Jiva.
from the top and he says that he sees, okay, how is this puzzle fitting? So now we may want to put things, and then we may do fixology. Oh, you know, like what to do. You know, my Mars is with my Venus is with Saturn, so I always stay single. So we should not be doing fixology. We should try to understand the whole picture, what actually Venus is telling, or what actually the 7th house is telling. And the second thing I would like to say is that when we are learning astrology, it can happen because everybody has malefics in their chart and they have so many aspects, and they will be throwing their aspects, conjunctions in so many houses. The horoscope is filled. You will never find any house in any chart which is free from one of the afflictions of the malefics, because they have 2-3 aspects. So we get too much bogged up sometimes. So it is essential that we also have knowledge of spirituality, of especially books like the Gita and other philosophical books, so which will give us the power to understand that whenever things get bad in life, we can take shelter in spirituality, in God. And then because all the time you will see some bad dasha will be running. Either it will be a natural malefic, or it will be of a benefic. It will rule some bad house. Bad, I mean Dusthana 6, 8, 12, which they call as the bad houses. So then always there will be some problem or the other in life, and that's how life is. You know, you will never have a smooth journey. So either it is benefics or malefics, they will give you suffering to some extent. So we need to understand the whole picture and not just get attached to, oh my God, my Saturn is in the 7th, what will happen, by seeing that, of course.
And that's the positive thing about YouTube. the thing that we have the space and the time to discuss this that couldn't be discussed before in newspapers or magazines, where you have a closed media, right? You have a little amount of words to express your astrological horoscope, but you don't have the space or the time to explain what Babajit says, that, you know, astrology has to do, you know, your position, just a single position does not,
Yes, it's
you
too
know,
limited.
determine everything about it. And YouTube, you know, offers that ability for us to explain these concepts on a much deeper level, on a much spiritual level, and a more holistic level. Of course, sometimes people don't want to listen to us and they just want to see the videos of 2-3 minutes, but that's another topic for another time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
and one last statement I wanted to say is, one very big spiritual guru, I met him one day. He said that if you only want spiritual progress, you don't need astrology.
yes.
You
Yeah.
don't need it. Go hell with your chart, throw it. It's not required, because what has to happen will anyways happen. But if you want to be an astrologer, you must have spiritual knowledge, because ultimately you cannot change what is there in the chart. That is not possible. What you can do is, you can tell the person that, see, your spiritual evolution is like this. In this you will find these material, in your material life, these are the roadblocks. So if you are planning to become an astrologer, you must have strong base on the scriptures. Otherwise
Oh,
you will not be able to guide that person. You will simply be like that mundane person who says, okay, 23rd August 2023 you
Yeah.
will get married, but anyways he will get married that day. So what's so great about that, you know? So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, you need some substance there to
can I?
back up your... Yeah,
Yeah.
Very
go
well
ahead,
said.
Corey.
Well,
Abhijit, I have to say what you said is so true. And, you know, reading the Srimad Bhagavatam really made this clear to me, that it's interesting how, you know, what you hear about in Vedic astrology is like a lot of remedies, like upayas, like do this, do that, the superficial side of it. But when you really go deep down into it, like the Srimad Bhagavatam is saying, surrender to your karma. Like, you know, like Lord Vishnu has put you in exactly where you need to be. And that's why I was trying to say that I think that every person is in the place they are exactly meant to be. And as it is our jobs as an astrologer to make them understand that, you know what I mean? And so one thing that's I think this is one reason why Jyotish and all forms of astrology have become more popular with the millennial group. Like there have been articles about this and stuff, and they're like, you know, the New York Times, like, why do more people believe in this fake thing or whatever? But, you know, we'll leave that alone for now. But I think the reason for why that is because astrology is like this sort of like gateway drug to spirituality in a sense, or it's
Yes.
like this gateway
Yeah.
thing to your spirituality. So millennials are too, you know, the stereotypes, we're too, at least over here in America, we're too into ourselves basically, and we don't really, you know, we don't want to work hard, you know, we just want to have everything handed to us. And but we have great ideals and great visions and things, but we haven't maybe suffered or had developed our Saturn as much as the previous generations that had it tougher. And so we are kind of like, you know, just a little more self-absorbed nowadays with the selfies and all this stuff. And so I think Jyotish is helping us get out of our box, of our little, you know, of our ego mind, and just kind of nudging people towards a more spiritual path in life. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
I wanted to
it's
say,
wonderful. Like this is the one of the wonderful things. Okay, it's commercial, it's everything you want, but also, you know, superficial things are not necessarily bad, because they are also manifestations of the divinity. You know, even like celebrity things, even more trivial things, and they also, like Corey said, they can be a gateway for people who want to go deeper into something deeper. Yeah. So, yeah, Lars, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the Satan in this situation and offer a slightly different point of view. Although I don't entirely disagree with what anyone said, but I was contemplating the other day how social media is very much like the Frankenstein monster in Mary Shelley's famous novel, where the Frankenstein monster was a genius in the original novel, and he doesn't have a soul, arguably. And so he's a reflection of whatever situations he's in. So when he's with the family that he's first learning from, right, he's sweet and compassionate, and he wants to be like these wonderful people that he observes. As soon as he becomes rejected, hated, he becomes hateful and he rejects others and becomes violent and so on. And so I see this with Facebook, especially, it is the kind of the downside of it is Facebook is going to reflect whatever we as individuals and as people are. And so there's tons of arguments, there's tons of ego, there's tons of like self-indulgence, self-promotion. You know, Andy Warhol said, in the future, everybody will be famous for 15 minutes.
Yes.
And he couldn't have been more right. So there's kind of this negative side of social media. And, you know, I've definitely been sucked into it numerous times. So that kind of is part of why I have like a little bit more of a pessimistic view towards it. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be sitting here with all you wonderful people having this really cool discussion, you know, people in different parts of the world. And, you know, I think the only person I've met in person was Corey at a Vedic astrology conference. So
yeah,
it's
that
like,
was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like,
time.
you know, yeah, there's a lot of good to it too, but there's also, I think unfortunately right now where humanity is still not really mature enough to fully make the best use of social media possible. And maybe that'll change. I have no idea. And then the other thing I wanted to say too is like, I think it is important to have like this spiritual knowledge and understanding. But I don't think it's important as to whether or not it's based on scriptures or not. And this is funny because I've read tons of ancient scriptures of like every major religion pretty much. And I'm a big fan of studying that stuff. But I think about Milarepa Buddha from Tibet, who, you know, he never studied any of that stuff. And he's one of the most highest realized sages to ever walk the planet, probably. And I think what I was going to say is that we can have knowledge of scriptures, okay, but if we don't have the living experience of what those scriptures talk about, then we're really just repeating stuff mentally from our mind, not from our heart. And I think that that's dangerous too. That's how you get the Oshos of the world and stuff. You know, the people that like know all this stuff, they're very impressive and they can tell you all this stuff, but it doesn't really change anything because they're not living it. They're not doing it from the heart. So yeah. I just feel like that's an important thing. And I also feel like maybe it's just me. I have a love-hate relationship with astrology. I think about 75% of the time it's a distraction and that it actually takes people away from themselves. And I think I've been taken away from myself studying it.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of, astrology is a double-edged sword, which is why it's ruled by Mercury. You know, sometimes Mercury gravitates toward the celestial things, toward unity, and sometimes it gravitates more towards the gross material things and gets lost in those. And so I think that happens with astrology a lot, which is why, you know, certain sages have disparaged it while also praising it simultaneously, which is always really hilarious to me.
Yeah. I want to echo what Lars is saying. And I totally agree with what everybody has said so far, including Lars. And I think the best way to understand it is that what is an asset is equally a liability. And that applies to pretty much everything. And the modern era, as we're calling it, has a lot of assets, but those assets are the very substance of its liabilities. And if you think about ancient times, you know, it's all relative because back then, people who were just face-to-face lived more or less in villages or roaming about nomadically. And so the only context in which to approach an astrologer would be in face-to-face context. And the only technology they had was just completely natural, you could say. Only way you could learn astrology would be from another human being directly in front of them. So it's only that whole consideration is relative to the fact that we now have a technology that globalizes everything. And that's an amazing thing because as Fernando was saying, and as I was saying before, astrology is really one tradition. That's the way that I look at it. You know, its origins are actually universal and it's sort of branched off in all these streams. But having astrology as a global phenomenon is actually kind of bringing that reality back to the surface. So that's a great thing. On the other hand, technology is, you know, a big issue because you can have a lot of crap out there. Anyone can read a book and start a YouTube channel and call themselves an astrologer and be totally full of it. You can have people putting out, you know, totally oversimplified interpretations. You can have people who, you know, in the ancient days, they didn't have computers. So people had to learn how to calculate charts. People had to learn how to observe, you know, the astronomical bodies. I mean, it's incredible. You read Surya Siddhanta, you realize, what were these people tapped into, you know, to have calculated all the positions of these planets with such detail. ancient astronomy is a marvel, you know, and here we are. We don't have to get into that state of consciousness. It's given to us, and we have computers to, you know, crunch out complex calculations in seconds that, you know, these people would have, you know, labored their lives to even grok. So that is a huge disadvantage to us in a way, because we are given at our fingertips that which was gained through really yoga. And we are now able to kind of regurgitate that like nobody's business. And if we have enough intelligence, we sound really like we know it, you know, and that's kind of what Lars was saying. That the difference between, you know, scriptures and actual living, tangible experience. And I think that's where spirituality and astrology intersect, which is you need to have spirituality, but it has to be esoteric. You know, it can't just be like you're doing all your pujas and mantras. And I don't mean to offend anybody by saying that, but that's a big reason why Tantra, you know, was supposedly given for the Kali Yuga, because it was realized that in the Kali Yuga, people no longer had the capacity for the ascetical paths. They needed to learn how to transform their experience, learn how to relate to the world as a play of the divine. And that's why, you know, we see Tantra as being such a huge revolution, you know, around the 10th and 11th centuries. So, you know, astrology can reflect a lot of levels of consciousness, but it needs to reflect a level of consciousness, basically. And astrologers in the modern era, millennial astrologers, we're spending a lot more time on YouTube, making videos, and we're not necessarily going outside as much. We're not necessarily interacting with people as much. We're not necessarily studying at the feet of a guru. We're just, you know, we're in social world, we're in technology world, and that's a big liability. At the same time, it's awesome. You know, that's the means for the spread of astrology. It's globalizing everything. Here we are, several traditions in one room, people from all over the world, different ethnicities. That's awesome, you know? This is an unimagined situation in the ancient world. But, you know, it's also a liability. So I just think that balance has to be kept in mind all the time. And, you know, I think it's good to remember our roots and not get caught up in like the sort of spiral of evolution, because evolution has a root. And we have an ancient root, you know, so people should have gurus, you know. I don't agree with that notion that, oh, we're evolving away from gurus and all of that. You know, gurus are the source of all knowledge, you know. I don't care if that's in a book, you know, of a great person. There are individuals of greater levels of consciousness whom we should benefit from. And that should remain the case as time goes on. And so, you know, I made a video called Qualifications of an Astrologer or something like that. Because someone asked me, like, how do I know what someone's saying? Because one person told me this thing means that thing. Another astrologer said it means that thing. So I made this video and I described, you know, how do you really identify the legitimate astrologer? And basically it's somebody who's a practitioner, you know, of astrology, of life, of yoga, however you define yoga, Western or Eastern, it's a universal term. So, you know, those are my basic thoughts.
Can I add something else? I don't want it to be talking too much. But,
no, but we'll just add this and then we'll make like a conclusion and
all right.
Yeah.
This is the only one thing I really feel strongly to talk about is the whole social media thing. I also made a video a few months back about, you know, just about YouTube astrology in general. And at that point I was feeling really just bummed out by it, because it was like, you know, like what Babaji says, you say, okay, Venus in the first house, this is how it is. Well, people just comment like, well, what about all these other things? It's like that, all those other things weren't real. You know, it's like, geez, when we teach, we have to break it down one at a time. You know what I mean? And then they think us to just tell them everything all at once. And then on the other hand, when
for free.
Right. Yeah. For free without being paid. Yeah. Ain't none of that. Forget that. And then when I actually do make a video that's super intricate with tons of examples, super technical, no one even watches it. You know what I mean? And it just doesn't get watched. It has like a fraction of the views. And again, like I have my K2 with social things and air things, and I need to kind of step away from this. And I'm an overly social sharing person. Like when I met Lars, I'm a little too talkative, if anything. I don't want to take all y'all's time, you know? And so for me, I had to check out for 6 months and just stop being on social media really the last 7 or 8 months.
Oh, dude, me too. I did that too.
Yeah, just a few things I just would post. I would post something and then go away again and not even look at it again for like 2 days, 3 days later. And to be honest, my life has been, and I also surrendered to a guru very sincerely. So I must say that that's been a big part of my life in the last year as well. But maybe both those things together, my life has been better than ever. The last 6 months of my life have been better than ever. So that's what I needed. I know for other people I've spoken to in this video, I was like, you need to be more on YouTube because of your karma. So everybody's stuff's different. And again, so for me, I had to think for myself more. And that is what I see missing the most in the millennial world is people are not thinking for themselves enough. They're just bombarded by so much information, so much data. And that's tough.
I just want to add something else to make echo of what Lars and Corey said. This is why this was occult knowledge. Because you're giving...
I think it still is occult knowledge. Even if it's on social media, it will always have this hidden...
But that's why people want to see the 3-minute videos. That's why people want to see the short descriptions, because they don't have the capacity or the interest to really delve into it. And, you know, and you might get, you know, repugnant of social media because of this, but this is human nature. And you know, social media is only bringing human nature to the forefront, and we're seeing it from a more close light, right? You know, and this is why this was occult knowledge. This was selective knowledge for selective people who had the capacity, the ability, and the overall interest to do this instead of, you know, going out and eating all day, going out and having sex all day, going out and having party all day. You know, this is occult knowledge. And as Nishi said, it's a liability, but it's a plus. It's a Faustian exchange. We are getting the ability to talk. I mean, we are in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 different parts of the world, and we are talking at the same time. Man, that blows my mind. I mean, this is incredible.
It really does feel very cool right now that we're doing this.
I mean, this is incredible. But at the same time, we are oversaturated with all this information, all this, you know, trivial
But at
knowledge.
the same time, Fernando, I'm going to say maybe there's somebody who watches this for the first time and they've never heard about Rahu or something.
That's true.
And for that person, it's going to be an inception.
Yeah, and that's the positive side of it. You know, that one triumph over 100, you know.
Yeah, but then they might go and look up a bunch of really crappy articles on it because they don't know.
It's their karma, you know.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
We can't really control the outcome. Also, as astrologers, also when we give readings, we have to detach. Like, it's very important. That's why meditation is good, not necessarily to be in samadhi all the time, but just to be grounded and to detach a bit also from the fruit of your predictions and everything. You just give the information, you're a channel, but then the person, what they do with it, it's their business.
Yeah, well, otherwise you're going to go completely insane. You're going to have nervous breakdowns. If you haven't had it yet, you just haven't done it enough. Trust me. You know what I mean? Like, that's why, Babaji, I needed the Srimad Bhagavatam to know that I was not the doer of everything. You know what I mean? Or else I wouldn't have been able to keep doing this. But that's not to say that, like what Lars says, Facebook and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you know, that's very astute, because I saw Facebook as just a microcosm of our own consciousness, and that Frankenstein monster that really could just be expanded to just how life is with the mind and duality and the projection phenomena. And I think we can all agree that deep down, that's what astrology is showing us, is what our projections are. And you know what I mean? And you can have a boss, you can work for a boss who truly is a great boss, but if you've got a terrible boss karma in your chart, that you will never like that boss, and they'll just talk to you in a certain way that you are so stressed out by. And it's like, so by teaching someone in the chart session that that's just the case, that's your issue, and you have to overcome that. Yeah. They can stop being so personal and taking it so personal. Yes, and then the karma exhausts itself.
Yeah, we have to always watch out not to be like the savior, to have the savior complex, to save the person, but just help them and just present them the information. That's one of the challenges I find. I think it was also for other generations, astrologers, and not just us.
And be optimistic and give hope to the person. Ashwin, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I think this is the classic problem that Indians usually face, because I totally understand why Babaji brought up that point about the 7th house stuff. There is Rahu in 7th house, there is Ketu in 7th house. And if you say something negative on YouTube, and that blows up so many minds, those who are actually watching it. So see, as much as we all spoke about Srimad Bhagavatam and what Nishi said about the ancient stuff, I think it is important for us to absorb the real stuff. There is Bhagavad Gita, there is Srimad Bhagavatam, and there are so many other spiritual stuff in terms of leading our own life. But astrology is just one thing. While I think all the spiritual scriptures or texts that Lars mentioned about the Tibetan, I think I love that, Lars, the Tibetan person that you spoke about. And I think these are just ways in which we can live life, and astrology is just one part of it. So I think people have to understand that it's not all. As Babajit said, there are so many planets, and if you talk about the trans-Neptunian planets, the count will just doesn't end. So I think it is important for us to not like overemphasize a particular position and use, as I already said, common sense.
Yeah,
Before
one,
coming to
one
conclusion.
last thing I wanted to say regarding this, which you said, the outer planets. So recently I had a recording with James Braha ji for 3 hours. So in that he spoke about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And I had read some articles, but I was like, okay, maybe these are good or great planets. But at the end, he ended up saying they are the worst of the malefics.
So now there's even more cruel planets, you guys.
Yeah,
Great.
then I was
Life
like, my
becomes
God,
even
Sun
more
is
difficult.
malefic,
I do not
Sun
agree with
is
that. I
malefic,
do not
Mars
agree
is
with that at
malefic,
all.
Saturn is malefic. They're all malefics. You are only
Maybe we can have a
Well, they're
different
malefics, yeah.
video
But
on outer planets. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
if,
think that's
if
a
you
longer topic.
if you're having Pluto stationary over your Lagna degree, you're gonna have that time. I mean, it's gonna be intense.
Carmina,
Yeah.
can I give 2 words of advice to millennial astrologers?
Please do, Nishi. Please do.
And to millennials in general. Okay?
Yes.
So just 2 takeaways from my point of view, at least.
Mhm.
One, go outside. You know, live life. Astrology is about living life. You know, you
Yes,
can interpret
exactly.
yourself, analyze yourself, and be interpreted too all day long. But the only point of that is to unlock the places of your life force that are not flowing. So live life. You know, go outside. Second is, in doing that, discover, you know, the flow of energy that is the planets, you know, in your own body mind, in your own consciousness. Like actually live, you know, in communion with the planets, you know, with astrology, with the world, with the cosmos. That's the point of astrology, is to realize that unity and breathe it, live it, you know. Don't get abstracted and just like objectified from everything and abstracted from everything. That's the problem with the millennial generation. We're abstracted by technology. That's its big thorn, abstraction. So to overcome that and accept its, you know, greatness, we should reconnect with everything that you know, we're trying to connect through all of this abstraction. So that's my words of advice.
Thank you,
One
Nishi.
sentence. One sentence.
Okay, one sentence and
Astrology is the path to free will.
is the what?
Excellent.
wait, I just have one
Astrology
more
is-
thing now.
And I okay, you first.
No, it's fine. I think we made our points today. So thank you guys for staying longer than we initially thought we would stay an hour, but now I see it's an hour 15. So Fernando, are you dying? Is it
Yeah,
burning?
no. I just want to say that another advice for millennials who are studying astrology, you know, read books, but there's gonna come a time where you need a teacher. So if you want to take the next step,
Hey,
Wait a second. Don't do that.
get a
Just
teacher or get teachers. Or
let people figure it out for themselves.
And the most,
Yeah.
and
And
the most,
don't free will.
and the most
Don't
important
do that.
thing,
Sorry.
the most important thing for a millennial astrology video, to finish it up, give us like and give us share and subscribe.
Yeah,
or
I'm
else my
gonna.
self-esteem will crumble.
Oh my God, I'm gonna put the links to everyone's channels and the social media. Yeah, but last of the last.
Yeah,
of the
so
last.
people get bogged up too much that I don't know how my planets are behaving. Some astrologers say this, somebody says this. So just check it in a practical life, what the planet represents. By that,
Yes.
you will know how your planet is. Marriage, Venus, that is 7th house. So you will understand. So that's one shortcut.
Yes, I think that is important for everyone to relate in their practical everyday life. They can relate and connect to the planets, and they can find more understanding in their patterns of behavior and the things that are going on around them. So thank you very much, my dear millennial colleagues, for gathering us today. It was such an interesting, insightful, and entertaining conversation, just the ingredients for a YouTube video.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you. You
Thank you.
can reach out all these wonderful astrologers. I'm going to post their information below, and check out their channels, check out their blogs, and yeah, maybe I'll see them again soon for a different topic. If you have ideas for like such a big video conversation, you can also leave them in the comments. So I'll see everyone soon. It was wonderful to see you, to connect with you guys, and maybe I'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you for conducting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Bye.